Hi, everyone. We're here on the sidelines of DX Week 2023 in Palo Alto. My name is Andrew Maywa. I'm an investment director at TDK Ventures. And here we have Gayathri. And today I'll be interviewing her and asking some questions about some of the discussions that we had today, the panel and our keynote speaker, and really uncover some more insights about the topics that we've covered here during DX Week. And so, Gayathri, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks first for the invite to the event. It was really amazing and really excited about some of the conversations that happened today and excited to be here on behalf of Hitachi Ventures. So thank you.
And maybe you could share a little bit about the areas where you invest and some of the things that you're looking at.
Sure. So Hitachi Ventures is the corporate venture arm of Hitachi. We manage about 600 million of AUM. We look at three broad pillars when it comes to investment. One is green or sustainability. We also look at what we call connective industries. And the way I think of it is smart anything, smart life, smart mobility, smart transportation, smart building, smart city, right? So everything from healthcare to Industry 4.0 to mobility is one of the pillars. And then the third pillar, which I tend to focus a little more on, is what we call the digital pillar. And we look at any technology that is an enabler for digital transformation. So it's more of an horizontal, unlike the green and the connective industries, but we are very excited about the potential of technology from a transformation standpoint, but we also look at sort of digitization or digital transformation happening in a certain industry vertical, say healthcare, or a function like supply chain or areas where things used to be pen and paper or Excel, but digital technologies like RPA or other automation enables things to happen faster, more efficient, better time to value, and better time to market. So we typically like to invest in Series A, Series B. Stage of the company, we can lead, co-lead, or follow. So it's wonderful, if I may say so myself.
Excellent. It is wonderful. Definitely exciting areas that you shared, and certainly digital transformation is the heart of DX Week. Right. And we had a number of wonderful speakers today. We had a keynote speaker who came in and shared a lot of great insights on digital transformation, as well as a panel that shared a plethora of anecdotes and some information really to help get us thinking. When you start thinking about digital transformation, what were some of the topics that were discussed today that you think are perhaps front and center in terms of digital transformation?
Absolutely. I mean, so much was covered between the panel and the keynote today, right? And of course, I'll be remiss if I don't use the word ChatGPT or generative AI, so I'll throw it in there for good measure. But sort of the talk around singularity being around, a decade is not that far. For someone to say singularity is 10 years from now is kind of awe-inspiring and scary all at once. So some of the areas that were discussed around sort of ethical AI, responsible AI, explainable AI was also very interesting. I think there was conversations around quantum computing, right? We at Hitachi have an investment in that area as well, more around marketplace and enablement. Think about it as a middleware. We've invested in a company called Strangeworks. And Hitachi itself, as a conglomerate, we are actively working on quantum technologies as well. I think we covered a very broad range, but at the end of the day, the way I think about things when I strip back all the buzzwords and the technology is, what are the ultimate use cases? What does the technology do to drive sort of humankind or the world, forward, right? So is it more efficiency? What is the underlying sort of use case? There were also talks around sort of application of AI in healthcare. And I frankly feel like healthcare is an area which doesn't get a lot of exposure. It has traditionally been behind from a technology standpoint. So it's kind of interesting to see the impact of technology in healthcare as well. So truly, as I said, quite a wide range of topics and all relevant and interesting. But I'm excited about sort of the possibilities of these technologies moving the needle for us in our day-to-day jobs, but also around how can we make the world a better place in terms of sustainability or ethical AI or explainable AI and so on. So those are very interesting. And then the question marks are around security. There was a big conversation around security. What happens if you have identity theft? What do you do, right? Those are big concerns and things that you experience and you can relate to, but you don't want that to happen. So I think there's a lot of interesting areas for VCs today to look at, thanks to technology, both from development and evolution of sort of progress, and also in terms of what are the pitfalls to avoid as well.
Wow, excellent points. And I agree with you. I think there are a lot of different challenges and certainly pitfalls to avoid. And of the different applications and use cases that were covered today and some of the ones that you're looking at, what's one example of an application that stands out as just notable to you in terms of the areas where you're looking to invest that you think is important for digital transformation?
So there was, in fact, there was conversation around, code generation by AI, right? So that to me is kind of fascinating. I'll talk about it in two sort of perspectives. One is around how good the quality of the code, because there was some jokes around that too, right? How do you know that the quality of the code that was generated was good enough or not good? Or so there's that question. But then there's also another question that I think Nicola basically said, hey, should we go back to assembly language, right? Yeah. Which I think is a fascinating question, and it's so appropriate because a lot of things we did or have evolved that were based on us as the user of that technology. Yes. Like if a human was coding, can we make the language more easier and so on? But that moves away from traditional machine-to-machine communication, right? Do you need the language to be in such a format if you strip out the human and if AI is doing the code for another machine, right? So I think that was an interesting conversation. Kind of brings me back though to explainable AI, because at the end of the day, code itself is just a means to an end, right? What I want to know is why was this code, or why was this outcome generated? Sure. Were there a set of possible outcomes and this one chosen, or is this outcome the natural sort of progression, right? So in some cases, like in math, 2 + 2 is always 4. You cannot suddenly say 5. So in those cases, it's much more easier to grasp, but a lot of human interactions, like hiring practice. If I have a code that's around recruitment, I want to know why was these 3 candidates the top 3 candidates, right? So if there is a way to remove that black box feeling and provide some explainability, I think that becomes important. But then again, I always wonder, so much of AI development is happening in the open source. Yes. So what does that mean for us as VCs? How should we be looking at this market? What is the, I think Diane talked about, like, what is the moat for software-based companies, right? So I always wonder, okay, software is one level, but then when you have open source, how do you even know if this is a skin on top of open source code, or is this fundamental IP, right? So as VCs, I feel like we are in an interesting time in terms of evaluating.
We certainly are, and you raise some good points. How do we know what is actually happening beneath the hood and things like that? I'd like to posit a question to you, see your thoughts. Could it be that as investors, maybe one of the important things that we look at is the team? Is that enough, or do we even need to go deeper and have different types of due diligence on the product itself, or is there anything else?
I was having this conversation another day, and they were classifying investors in categories based on what drives them. They were talking about some are product-driven VCs. They get sold on the idea of the product. Some are team driven sort of VCs, and some are market driven, like, oh, this is a huge market, I'm going to go. All three are important, right? As VCs, we look at all three, but something in that three becomes kind of your anchor, like a personal anchor. And I think I'm more of a team driven VC actually, and then the product and the technology becomes my secondary sort of pillar, and then the market the third. And the way I think about it is I'm not going to be looking at anything where the market is small. So I'm just going to assume that anything that I look at meets that basic criteria. Sure. Then I look at the team for a couple of things. One is the team's experience, just understanding what they bring to the table, what unique value. I think of the team as the moat sometimes. Because as we all know, when it comes to software or technology, it's replicable. It's not like it's 100% foolproof. Even if that secret sauce is not known, there's a way to bypass. And it's okay to have multiple sort of winners in a category. But what makes that team tick?
Yes.
It's not just about one product and one and done, right? They have to have that continued success. And I always wonder, like, is this that team that can deliver repeatably, right? So just look at the last 3 years. We had a war, COVID,
a lot.
Exactly. And that's where the team's resilience and their ability to kind of win comes up. So I definitely look at that, right, as one of my core areas. The second one, as I said, is product. I look at the team, and then I look at the product as a differentiator, because you need that first entry point into the market. Definitely. And then you think about, okay, what are you going to do to build out that capability to maintain that edge? So to your question, yes, and I think a lot of the trust questions also get addressed by the team. If you know that the team is ethical, that they would hopefully do things the right way. So that kind of is my barometer, I think, my internal barometer. So
I like it. I think that meshes very well with the way we see things at TDK Ventures. And I want to go back to something you said earlier. You talked a little bit about explainable AI. And in my mind, I can think of many scenarios where we would want to really understand why a particular result was chosen by some AI software. And the question on my mind is, do we see any startups that are really innovating in the space? Or is it an area where there are fewer startups that are really taking a step forward, being bold and sharing something with the market that really can deliver for explainable AI?
There are startups like Fiddler and sort of Darwin and others who are looking at sort of explainable AI. The question that, if I were to flip, is I have not kept track of them, so I don't know if they've moved fast to keep up with the changes that are happening, and I would assume they have, but I have not kept track. This is an area that I would personally like to maybe dig in, just to, also from a data standpoint. There was a lot of conversation also in the panel today around the cat and mouse game, because some of these networks or models are based on adversarial networks. So there's you detect, you improve, you detect, you improve, right? So how do I know that the data that's being presented to me is legitimate, right? So I think there's a very strong security implication that, again, is interesting to me. So those are areas that I would like to maybe dig into as we move in this journey.
Those are great points. I would also like to learn more about those areas.
Hey, happy to collaborate with you guys.
Absolutely. Very
awesome.
Cool. And so I think one of the topics that kept coming up was around legal and regulatory. Correct. What is the appropriate role for legal and regulatory in the various spaces that we've been discussing today? And I do think for a number of areas, I can see that industry could potentially be much further ahead than where some of the various regulatory bodies are focused. As investors, what do you see as some of the ways that we could really tackle that head on, or maybe just address that? Right. What is the appropriate role for legal and regulatory, and how can we help?
I think your point is very valid, because I think the pace with which innovation is moving is hard for regulation to keep up, right? I mean, let's even look at sort of an analogy in the crypto world.
Yeah.
Crypto is not new; it's been now around for a long time, and you still see the regulatory bodies struggling to keep up with it. They're trying to embrace the technology, but still having a hard time to draw the line of what is considered acceptable and what's not. And I can see the same thing happening from an AI and machine learning perspective as well, because just imagine the pace with which, because OpenAI has been so accessible, you see it. It's kind of in your face now. Even like few months ago, last year, it was, it was happening. The VCs knew, but now pretty much everybody's talking about it, right? So I think it's hard to keep up. And frankly, I feel like they're not sure what are the boundaries and what is the limit. When you don't know the limit, it's hard to set boundaries, because it's moving. Every time you think you're making progress, the end goal keeps shifting. So that's interesting. And I think this is where a strong partnership between sort of private and government is needed. So there is a constant feedback loop. And there needs to be a process where some of these are not necessarily full-blown regulations, but at least guidelines are published and talked about. So we have, we as investors also know, okay, we are still in safe territory or not. Like there was conversations around copyright, right? All these data, and that's being used to train, just because it's in the public domain doesn't mean, these companies have ownership on that data, right? So there's a lot of gray.
Yeah.
Before it was black and white, but the grays were, I think, smaller, but I think the grays have now gotten wider, in my opinion.
Yeah. You raised an excellent point. I think there is this notion that government could do more to sort of define or clarify some of the points in those gray areas. I think that's important. I want to ask you a related question. Somebody in the panel today raised this point that the regulations should be flexible. What are your thoughts on
that's why I use the word guideline, because when you say regulation, it feels like a law, and then it feels inflexible. In the panel, they also talked about how copyright doesn't deal with, documents that are on the web, as opposed to a printed document, right? So I think guidelines are a good way. I mean, maybe there's a better word for it, but are a way to kind of focus on, of course, when you come to enforcement, you do need some strict sort of laws, but let's start with the baby step of guidelines of, hey, these are acceptable and these are not acceptable. And when it's in this area, let's figure out if it falls within the not acceptable. Is it completely unacceptable, or is there, again, gray area where it could be okay for certain reasons? So there's so many steps, I think, in the process that I think it's not a cut and dry, right? If let's say a model is based on my data, yes, you can say it's not your data, but if I give authorization to use the data, then it should be fine, right? So, but if it's in a conference like this and there are 20 people, then you need 20 people's permission. So it also needs to scale. That's the other aspect of it, right? So how can you make your guidelines in a way that it's scalable, it's easy to attain? And that's exactly what's happening with the OpenAI. When they crawl the web and used every data, some are copyright based, some are not. So you can't go back and untrain the the model now. So how do you deal with the ramifications of it?
You've raised a lot of important issues. In fact, given us a lot of food for thought. And certainly, I think all these are areas where there could be more dialogue and to really surface the issues and to identify the best ways to approach them.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, one of the things that we talked about today was also this idea behind as more companies are innovating and they're receiving investment, how are they going to enter the market? Is it more, are they looking to directly compete with the NVIDIAs of the world, or is there some other way for them to approach the market?
I'm assuming you're referring to startups that are trying to...
Yes, startups that are
yeah,
growing.
Yeah,
And
against incumbents like NVIDIA and others. I think the one interesting thing that I've noticed, and I could be wrong, is historically, startups had an edge because there was so much inertia within large corporations for whatever reason, right? They couldn't move or respond fast enough. But in today's sort of incumbents, be it Microsoft or Google or Facebook, the reaction time seems to be much faster. Recent Google's I/O announcement, I mean, the flurry of things that they launched, not just one, it's amazing. And somebody else was talking about being at a Microsoft event with Satya Nadella, and he basically saying, I come in energized every day as if I'm a startup founder, right, or like an entrepreneur, because if I don't, I'm behind the curve. So I think technology has moved to a point where everyone senses that urgency and that fear of being left behind. But that doesn't mean that there is no opportunity for startups, right? So I think there's still so many areas, because I think the problem space is also equally expanded, which means the opportunity space is expanded. So, and as we talked about in many of the panels, most of the big startup exits happen through acquisitions. So you build an awesome product and there'll be a buyer for you, because the appetite for having those cutting edge technologies higher as well. It's always a give and take. While the challenges have gotten more stringent and more harder, but I think the opportunities have also expanded. And the domain space that everyone's operating. No company can look at every single thing in every single area. So that means there's opportunity for startups to come in and create that next wave of innovation.
completely agree with you. Here at DX Week, one of the things that we try to emphasize is innovation that leads to positive impact for the planet. During one of the discussions today, I think somebody raised the point that for training for some of these large language models, perhaps there could be a very large carbon impact, a very negative carbon impact, I should say. What are some of your views on the right way that some of the innovative companies can approach this, so that we can have positive impact to society?
While we talk about sort of AGI or singularity and how far AI and machine learning have come, I still feel like there's so much that we don't know today in terms of how our human body operates. I mean, as you said, the carbon footprint of training these large language models is so immense. But look at how our brain operates. We don't need the power consumption of a human brain is much more, limited, right? And I think there's so much to unpack. Technology has sort of accelerated. I think there are still so many unknowns. Even something as basic as how our body operates, right? As I was telling someone, I had a medical condition, and the doctor's response was, oh, just pain management, take ibuprofen. And that's not preventive, right? It's more like once it's done, here's your diagnostic maintenance, and just do like your repair every now and then. But we're not going to predict failure, or we're not going to do any preemptive solutions. That's because we don't understand how our body works and how to treat it and in the same way, I feel like our brains are so powerful, and we've so far it's all brute forced in terms of like, let me train with trillions of parameters and billions of parameters. Great, yes, retraining is more efficient, but still, what happens if suddenly there's a paradigm shift? And because all the data that was generated is based on human knowledge, and we all know, as they said in the panel, we've not come across a single perfect human being. So that means the data that's produced may also be biased and so on. If suddenly there is a paradigm shift, how you can't just retrain, you have to untrain and train, right? So is there a more efficient way of building these models? Is there, other approaches? That's something that has been on my mind for some time. So it's great. I used to work at a memory company before, and we always talked about the memory wall. It's not just the compute. It's about accessing the data. When you're training on these billions and trillions of data parameters, they don't sit in one place.
That's right.
They are disaggregated, right? So every time you have to fetch that data, train the model, that's compute. That's energy. That's being consumed.
That's right.
And most of the energy consumption actually happens in that data movement, basically, right? So you're limited by that weakest link, and that weakest link is the constant movement of data. How can we do that more efficiently? Are there better ways? And so on. So I think it's I feel like we are still ways to go. I feel like we made so much progress, but in
Right.
terms of like being more sustainable and more eco-friendly, I think we still have ways to go. But I think there's a lot of awareness around it, and unlike the previous wave of sustainability, I think this time I'm hoping it's there to stay, and because it's not just one way, it's driven by multiple parties. It's not just enforced. There's demand, there's ask. Consumers want sustainable products. People in the ecosystem want to deliver those products sustainably, so it creates a natural pull in that direction. So I'm hoping that means we will drive towards better architectures that are, better efficient, more efficient, maybe carbon neutral, maybe even carbon negative, or we'll find other alternate sources of energy. There's been talks around fusion and so on, so we'll see.
Certainly. Yeah, you've raised some very good points, and it brings a thought to mind around silicon photonics. And I think today someone suggested that perhaps advances in silicon photonics could be maybe not the answer, but one answer that could open the door to more energy efficient data transfer. What are some of your thoughts around that?
In my previous sort of firm, I invested in a company that does micro LED based optical interconnects. So the idea of replacing copper with short distance multimode fiber using traditional off the shelf micro LEDs that are used for healthcare purposes like display and so on. I think there is a lot of potential because light is something that we've dealt with. We know how to manipulate. So we know what works and we know the limitations. So I think there's a lot of potential there. It's knowing exactly those limitations. If a lot of information is, it originates in analog, but then a lot of the compute is digital. If there's a lot of conversion back and forth, then again, you lose some of that. So knowing what are the best places where you can limit those kind of analog to digital conversions also are important because that's also another source of energy consumption. Every time you convert and then convert it back, it causes loss. Yeah, exactly. So.
Wow, you've shared some very powerful insights, and I've learned so much from this discussion. I'd like to just ask one final question. And as I've been listening to the discussions today, I've learned so much. Yet at the same time, I recognize that there are others, sort of, let's say, young entrepreneurs or folks who are still in study, who I think ought to have a place in this discussion, have a place in really developing some of these innovative technologies. What would you say is the role that academia has to play in the areas that we've been discussing today?
Massive, because I have two young kids, teenagers, and I'm constantly telling them the world that they are growing up in is very different from the world I grew up in, and that can be viewed as a big advantage for them. But our traditional academia is based on what you and I learned in school, right? So if coding is going to go away, based on some of the conversations in the panel today, should I be telling my kids to go to a Python coding camp this summer, or should I be sending them somewhere else, right? And that's where I think academia in general needs to keep up with the innovation that's happening and prepare the next generation.
Yes.
Be it, from high school or even like all the way from elementary to sort of graduate or college courses on what the real future needs will be,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that means you need to be super adaptive about the changes that are happening and how do you adjust your curriculum based on that. And sometimes my kids ask me questions like, why do for this test I'm taking, I cannot use a calculator. What is the value? And then I say, well, I did it when I was, but then in my mind I'm saying, do I want them to know this, do mental math, or are their brain cells better served storing some other information, right? It's a constant battle in terms of, okay, what kind of advice do I give, right? And I think that's a great place for academia to be thinking about, okay, we are preparing the future generation. Is the world that they are going to be in the same as the world that we grew up in? And I would bet that it's going to be much different. Come on, when I left India to come here, I had to go to like an internet cafe to access the web. I couldn't send email without like taking time off, like to go find a place to, log on. And I even remember that sound, the dial tone that would come when my network would connect. Right. My kids can't even relate to that. They don't even know why the save button looks like a floppy disk. And if I say it's a floppy disk, they don't. Look at the change that's happened, right? The world, my kids get their information from TikTok and not necessarily the traditional news sources. That means even more important around how authentic is the data that they're consuming. Right, so academia, I think, has a very important role to play and adapt to what's happening in the outside world.
Completely agree with you. Thank you so much. You've shared so many wonderful insights. I'm certain our audience has learned a lot, and I've been really, I feel like I've been educated by what you've shared, and I share a lot of your views, and I think this is something that can really benefit our audience. So thank you again for joining us for this interview, and looking forward to further interviews to come.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, and it was a great session.